voiceamerica.com.
Welcome to Crime Prevention 101 with host Susan Bartelstone. We're so happy you've joined us this weekend. Over the next hour, you'll learn the tips, tricks, and vital information that'll help you keep yourself confident and safe. Now, here's the host of Crime Prevention 101, Susan Bartelstone.
And hello, everybody. Welcome once again to Crime Prevention 101, the personal safety radio show, and I'm so happy to be here with you. Now, this show is airing in December, and I've got a bit of a change of pace for you today. Now, one of the things that I regularly do, I scout Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com to find books and authors that I think might be of interest to the show. And I found not one, but 20 books, either written, co-written, or edited by my guest today, Dr. Arthur Lurigio. And I just can't wait to speak with him and have you all listen to him. 20 books. I mean, it was hard enough for me to finish my one book, let alone 20. So this is just awesome to me. But before I introduce Dr. Lurigio, I've got some weird police reports for you, and I haven't done this segment in a while, and I got a request to do more of them. And weird police reports, as long as you're not the victim of a crime, sometimes criminals are really stupid, and they do kind of funny, odd things. And I like to put a little bit of a lighter side into this show because not every criminal out there, I want people to understand that, not everyone out there is cold-blooded, heartless, and some of them are stupid and they get caught. So here's a couple of the weird police reports that I like for today. Alfred James Prince, this guy was on trial for bank robbery in Oklahoma City, and he had attempted several times to demonstrate that he was incompetent to stand trial, including an incident where he stood up, dropped his pants, and urinated on his lawyer, James Kearney. However, the judge wasn't buying it, Judge Wade Burby, and he sentenced him. And Mr. Prince went to the Federal Appeals Court to try to get this conviction overturned, but the appeals court ruled, and I just love this, incontinence does not equal incompetence. Now, I mean, you're just not going to hear that too many times, that phrase, okay? And they affirmed his conviction, and after the appeal, Judge Burby lamented about lawyers who believe that a law degree is a ticket to a glamorous career. And I am sure that lawyer James Kearney no longer believes that, if he ever did. So that was one of them. The next one that I had thought was kind of interesting, Daniel Robert Chodine, 24-year-old, pleaded guilty to attempted robbery of a convenience store in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. And according to the prosecutor, Chodine told the man that he was going to rob the store, gave the man $1, sounds like some innocent bystander, gave the man $1, asked him to go into the store and buy Chodine a scarf that would conceal his identity during the crime. So the man takes the $1, walked inside, and informed the clerk, who promptly called police and arrested Mr. Chodine. Nice, you know? That was really bright of him. You can't make this stuff up. And lastly, I thought this was kind of interesting. A man escaped after robbing a First National Bank branch in Farmington, New Mexico. And the police later discovered that his getaway car, a white Dodge Caravan, he had just taken out for a test drive from a local car dealer, which he returned after the robbery. So, you know, it's nice to know that some criminals out there are not totally dishonest. You know, maybe he didn't like the car. Who knows why he did it? But he returned it. They identified the car, and they caught him. So weird. All right, now, let's get down to business. I want to introduce my guest, Dr. Arthur Lurigio. He is a psychologist and a criminologist. He is the Associate Dean for Faculty in the College of Arts and Sciences, and he's also a Professor of Criminal Justice and Psychology at Loyola University, Chicago. He's also the Director of the Center for the Advancement of Research, Training, and Education at Loyola. He is a Senior Research Advisor at Illinois Treatment Alternatives for Safe Communities. Amazing resume. His research is primarily in the areas of offender drug abuse and dependence problems, mental disorders and crime, community corrections, police-community relations, criminal victimization, and victim services. And he has received several prestigious awards for his research and his outstanding contributions to criminology and criminal justice practices. He's been writing since 1996 at least, which may account for some of those 20 books. Anyway, Dr. Lurigio, welcome to Crime Prevention 101.
Thank you so much for your warm introduction, and it's my pleasure to be with you today.
Oh, mine too. Now, let's talk about the book that you wrote, Victims of Crime. Now, when I went to Amazon.com, they described the book as follows: a study of crime victims and the process of victimization. It explains the dramatic changes in our criminal justice system over the past few decades and shapes the course of changes yet to come. And they said that this is not just a textbook for researchers, but should be read by victims' rights advocates, those who deal with victims in the field of law, social work, counseling, and criminal justice. So I just had to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Now you were one of the co-writers of Part 1, right? Another look at victim problems, policies, and programs. Now, just tell me a little bit, how did this book come about?
I was interested initially in criminal victimization because of the adverse psychological consequences of being a victim of crime. I wanted to focus on how people cope in the aftermath of being a crime victim. Most of the research to date, when I started in the field, focused on victims of aggravated criminal sexual assault, rape victims. They got, deservingly so, a lot of attention from researchers because the crime itself is one of the most devastating that anybody can ever experience. But I thought that victims of other types of crime might also be suffering from psychological harm. And my research looked at burglary victims, victims of armed robbery, and non-criminal sexual assault, and found that a large proportion of them did indeed suffer from the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. They suffered from anxiety, depression, phobic behaviors and avoidance behaviors, and had a difficult time adjusting to their lives after they've been victimized. And often their family members and friends didn't understand the devastating effects of the incident and blamed victims for what happened to them. And this blaming
yes.
was also part of victims' experiences in the criminal justice system, which took me to the next avenue for research, was to examine more closely victims' experiences in the criminal justice system.
And I want to pick up these some of these things that we talked about in a little more detail. Just hold on to that thought. But let's start back at the beginning. Who is the most vulnerable to being a victim of crime?
For all the years we've been collecting data on criminal victimization, we have found, and this won't be a surprise to you or to your listening audience, but people who live in poor communities are the most likely to be victims of crime. Crime is higher in areas of impoverishment, in areas in which there are high rates of school dropout, unemployment, gang and drug activity. Poverty is one of the best predictors of criminal victimization, especially with regard to violent crime. Anybody can be, of course, a victim of crime, but if you look at risks based on socio-demographic characteristics, you can array people on the continuum of vulnerability. And so the most vulnerable people to crime, and I'm going to focus in particular on violent crime. That's the crime that scares us the most and does the most devastation to our lives. The most vulnerable to violent crime are poor, young men of color. The least vulnerable victims of violent crime are more affluent, older white women.
And so, of course, those are who you hear about more than any other group, right?
You hear about them because the news is more likely to report unusual occurrences of crime, which gives people the false perception that these more unusual incidents are more common than they actually are. So if an older white woman is a victim of violent crime, you're more likely to hear about that on the news, especially if it's a prominent person, than you are likely to hear about a young African-American man being a victim of violent crime. That's commonplace. Those incidents occur every day. They are not newsworthy. But when we hear about the older white women being a victim, and those incidents are repeated in the media, we acquire the false perception that people within that demographic category are vulnerable to crime when actually they're not. So the media can create false perceptions about people's vulnerability to crime and also create false perceptions about the types of crimes people are likely to be vulnerable to. Unusual crimes, which don't pose much of a risk for us, because they're showcased in the media, make us believe that they do pose a risk. May I give an example?
Absolutely true.
An example is a stranger abducting a child, sexually violating a child. That's thankfully unusual. Most children who are abducted from estranged parents or family members. They're not abducted by strangers. When we hear about attempted stranger abductions or completed stranger abductions, which we do because they're unusual, we believe that they're commonplace. And they're very frightening for those of us who have children. When we hear about that happening on the news, we believe that the risk of our child being a victim of such a crime is higher than it actually is. If a child is going to be abducted or if a child is going to be abused in any fashion, it's usually by someone the child knows. It's not a stranger.
I actually think the statistic is that so-called stranger danger factor is only about 15%.
Yes, Susan.
15% of the crimes of that nature committed. So all the rest is by a family member or a next-door neighbor or someone that you know, a friend of the family, an older brother, that kind of thing.
Yes, a child is most likely to be a victim of sexual abuse or assault by someone who the child knows, someone who the child's had contact with. Sexual predators work by cultivating relationships with children, bringing children into their confidence, showering the child with praise and gifts and so forth. This is not a stranger who's going to be able to do that.
Let me ask you to just hold this thought. We're coming up to our first break, and I want to pick this up when we come back. So everybody stay tuned. We'll be right back.
News, opinion, your voice counts. Call toll-free 1-866-472-5787. 1-866-472-5787. VoiceAmerica.com. After more than 17 years' experience teaching safety skills to thousands of women and men, crime prevention and personal safety expert Susan Bartelstone concluded that by thinking and responding quickly, ideally within 20 seconds, potentially violent criminal encounters can be prevented. Using techniques from many different disciplines and illustrated by 60 real-life examples and success stories, Susan shows how it's done in her new book, Think Fast and Prevent a Violent Crime, How to Respond to Danger in 20 Seconds or Less. Check out www.fightsafe.com fightsafe.com for more information. You'll also find information there on Susan's upcoming Crime Prevention 101 personal safety teleseminars. Think fast, talk fast, fight smart, which stress the many opportunities you have to deter or defuse a criminal encounter and how to use your brains instead of your muscles in a fight. Look for the new book information or sign up for Susan Bartelstone's personal safety seminars at www.fightsafe.com today. Have you ever thought about having your own internet talk show? Well, if you said yes, then click About Us. Then click Be a Host to get more information. Or just call Jeff Spinard at 480-294-6417.
Say that again?
480-294-6417. VoiceAmerica.com.
You're listening to Crime Prevention 101 with Susan Bartelstone. We invite you to share your stories, tips, or suggestions for topics you'd like us to cover, and Susan will address some of these on future shows. Send your story or idea to solutions@fightsafe.com. That email address again is solutions@fightsafe.com. Now back to Crime Prevention 101 with Susan Bartelstone.
And welcome back, everybody. Crime Prevention 101 here. And I'm talking with Dr. Arthur Lurigio, author or co-author or editor of over 20 books, and we're talking about The Victims of Crime, his book. And we were talking. We got off a little bit on a tangent, but I want to go back to let's go back again and talk about the consequences of criminal victimization and some of the emotional correlates of victimization. I want everyone to understand what happens to a victim of a crime.
The consequences are devastating for individuals, families, and community from a psychological standpoint. And the emotional consequences are often the most difficult to measure. What we can measure more easily and what we can quantify more easily are the amount of property damaged or lost. We can measure medical expenses. What we can't measure is the cost of victimization along emotional lines. The people who are victimized, who suffer from depression, and who are unable to go to work, who are unable to care for their families, the people who suffer from severe anxiety, which may cause them to be homebound for weeks or months following the incident. Victimization shatters a victim's illusion of invulnerability. We all walk around with the view that bad things are not going to befall us in our everyday life. If we thought about all of the terrible things that might happen to us in the course of a given day, we wouldn't be able to function very effectively. So we walk around with illusions of invulnerability. Being a crime victim shatters that. Shattering the illusion of vulnerability creates a lot of anxiety and also leads people to feel helpless, and it leads them to feel like they've lost control of their lives. Feeling helpless and losing control over your life makes people feel depressed. So victims of violent crime, and I studied victims of armed robbery, I studied victims of non-sexual assault, they have their illusions of invulnerability shattered. And in particular, that's likely to happen when they believe that their life was at stake, that their life was threatened during the incident, that they might have been killed during the incident. Those are the folks who have the most severe reactions to criminal victimization. Not only do they feel vulnerable to future crime, but they believe in the aftermath of criminal victimization that they are more likely to be the victims of a variety of adverse life events. They're more likely to believe than non-crime victims that they're going to have a heart attack, that they're going to get cancer, that they're going to get in an automobile accident, that their loved ones and family members are going to face the tragedies in their lives. Criminal victimization is a occurrence in life that has a ripple effect. And the best way clinically to capture what happens to people who suffer from psychological consequences is to use the clinical term post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a collection of symptoms, the hallmark of which are depression and anxiety that people suffer when they experience tragedies.
And it also has a chemical component to it as well, does it not? Where a trigger in the brain releases the adrenaline.
Yes.
And brings them right back over and over again to the actual triggering incident.
Yes. So that any cue in their everyday life can trigger the incident and they can re-experience it. That's part of post-traumatic stress disorders list of symptoms. It's re-experiencing the event. It's obsessing about the event. It's also being startled at loud noises, feeling like you're a prisoner in your home because it's not safe to venture outside. We don't hear much about those consequences. The public is usually only given information about the occurrence of a criminal incident. They're not given information about the aftermath. So you hear about somebody being a victim of crime, or you hear about somebody being murdered. You don't hear about the crime victim suffering for the months and the years after. You don't hear about the surviving family members of the homicide victims suffering for months and years after, maybe never to get over the incident.
That's right. They are victims as well. And these are people you study too, is that correct?
Yes. We'll call that... Yes, secondary victimization is a term that's used in a couple of ways. The one way that I've used the term secondary victimization is what happens to crime victims when they talk about the incident with family and friends who are not sensitive and who do not understand what they've gone through, and start blaming them for the incident and making them blame themselves for the incident, which causes a downward spiral in their self-esteem and in their confidence. The other way I use secondary victimization is a similar process that occurs when victims report their crime and decide to move forward with the prosecution of their crime. Rape victims, in particular, were the first group of victims to reveal the horrific experiences they had in the criminal justice system, in which they were battered and abused even further when they got on the witness stand, when they were blamed by police officers for the occurrence, or when police officers and others didn't take their claims seriously and believe that they were willing participants in the sexual assault. That's another way that...
And by the defense attorneys, by the way, also putting them on trial and trying to tear them to shreds. I mean, talk about wanting to urinate on an attorney. I can think of a few of those. I'd like to get that guy back there to deal with these attorneys, that guy I talked about in the beginning. Yeah, that is also victimization by the system.
It's by the system, which I call formal secondary victimization, and then by people in the victim social network, which I call informal secondary victimization. So we've uncovered a lot of insensitivity toward crime victims, and the expectation is you should be past this. This event happened to you a week ago, a month ago, 6 months ago. Why are you still obsessing about it? Why are you anxious about it? Why do you continue to talk about it? This is before we really had a clear understanding of the nature of post-traumatic stress disorder and the kind of havoc that it wreaks on people's lives. Some crime victims never fully recover from the incident. They never feel the same as they did before the incident, and they mark their lives as pre-victimization, post-victimization. It becomes a life trajectory marker. It's such a traumatic incident.
In fact, one of the things that, because I've dealt with many ends of the spectrum here in the work that I've done for all these years, is that you're never going to forget what happened to you. The best that you can hope for is to be able to put it into perspective so that you can overcome the debilitating consequences and get on with your life. But you will never forget.
Never forget, but you're able to incorporate it and assimilate it into your life experiences in a way that allowed you to move forward so that it's not hampering your day-to-day function. And that was an excellent point. May I say something about how you can get there faster? You need immediate intervention. Crisis intervention in the aftermath of victimization is critical. Also, in the case of burglary, when people feel that their safe haven, their personal space was violated, they also feel very vulnerable and have psychological consequences. So you want to help burglary victims with material support. Repair the broken locks and windows as soon as possible so that they start getting a sense of feeling a little bit safer in the confines of their own home or apartment. But crisis intervention is critical, and psychological services, sometimes psychiatric services, are needed to treat the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. The longer the symptoms go untreated, the less likely a person is to go back to a full and high level of functioning in their lives. It takes longer, and it's because of the biochemical kinds of changes that you mentioned that put your brain in overdrive so that you're hypersensitive and you feel anxious and you are hyper alert. These were all important survival skills when we were primitive and had to protect ourselves against internal threats. And so the underlying physiological and brain responses that were part of our evolutionary heritage are still with us. But the threats that we could immediately face when we were more primitive, they would go away pretty quickly. So if you were attacked by a wild animal, you run away or you kill the wild animal and the threat's gone. You know, in the society we live in now, you're a victim of violent crime. You haven't killed your assailant. You haven't removed the threat. The threat now is heightened for you, and so your body's always prepared for the fight and flight response, which is a terrible stressor. And it's expressed in anxiety and depression because the threat doesn't really go away.
That's part of that PTSD that we're talking about. We're coming up on our next break. Let's hold that thought, and I wanted to talk about this healing stuff once again when we come back. So let's take our break, and we'll be right back.
Ask the experts. Call toll-free right now, 1-866-472-5787. And ask our All-Star team to answer your question. That's 1-866-472-5787.
Thank you for calling.
VoiceAmerica.com. After more than 17 years' experience teaching safety skills to thousands of women and men, crime prevention and personal safety expert Susan Bartelstone concluded that by thinking and responding quickly, ideally within 20 seconds, potentially violent criminal encounters can be prevented. Using techniques from many different disciplines and illustrated by 60 real-life examples and success stories, Susan shows how it's done in her new book, Think Fast and Prevent a Violent Crime, How to Respond to Danger in 20 Seconds or Less. Check out www.fightsafe.com for more information. You'll also find information there on Susan's upcoming Crime Prevention 101 personal safety teleseminars. Think fast, talk fast, fight smart would stress the many opportunities you have to deter or defuse a criminal encounter and how to use your brains instead of your muscles in a fight. Look for the new book information or sign up for Susan Bartelstone's personal safety seminars at www.fightsafe.com today. Talk, talk, talk. That's all we do is talk. Yeah! If you'd like to talk, call us toll-free right now at 1-866-472-5787. 1-866-472-5787.
That's it.
VoiceAmerica.com.
You're listening to Crime Prevention 101 with Susan Bartelstone. We invite you to share your stories, tips, or suggestions for topics you'd like us to cover, and Susan will address some of these on future shows. Send your story or idea to solutions@fightsafe.com. That email address again is solutions@fightsafe.com. Now back to Crime Prevention 101 with Susan Bartelstone.
And welcome back, everybody. And I'm talking with my guest, Dr. Arthur Lurigio, and we're talking about his book, Victims of Crime. And we were talking about post-traumatic stress disorder and healing. And I just did want to mention, now, you made the point, immediate help, whether it's psychological help or, just the physical act of changing locks and stuff. And I just wanted to point out to my listeners today that I did 3 shows on different, not what we call non-traditional ways of healing. After you've seen your traditional therapist, there are 3 shows. One was healing with a very innovative technique, psychological technique called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which has done amazing things for people who are still suffering from these flashbacks and post-traumatic stress lingering things, consequences that we were talking about. I also did a program about healing with self-defense, which is also tremendously healing in terms of shaking off those consequences that are lingering. And I did a show about healing through creativity, another aspect of getting online support and communities and internet associations that also tremendously healing. So I wanted to just let people know about that. And they're all in the archives on my voiceamerica.com webpage and also in my personal website, dearsafetysolutions.com. Now, Dr. Lurigio, there's a term that you use, fear of crime. Did we go over that already? Because I definitely, that's stuck in my mind. What is fear of crime and what causes fear of crime? Is that the victimization part of it?
Victimization is one experience that elevates fear of crime, and not only fear of experiencing the same type of crime you were a victim of, but fear of crime in general. Fear of crime is also fueled by the media, and so we alluded to that earlier in our conversation. Being bombarded with stories about crime that really misrepresent people's risk of victimization is another way to elevate fear of crime. Learning about people in your family or in the community who become victims increases fear of crime. That's called vicarious victimization. So that there are various ways in which people's fear of crime is increased. And increasing fear of crime and not following that up with ways in which you can lower risk of victimization or drilling down more deeply to get a better understanding of crime statistics and vulnerability actually increases crime. What you do on your show is give people helpful information so that they're better able to assess their risk. They're better able to protect themselves against future victimization. And if they've become a victim, they're better able to recover. The media in general only presents shows about victimization. And that increases people's fear of crime. When people are afraid of crime, they're less likely to go out in the evening. They're less likely to go shopping, less likely to go to the show, especially older people who feel particularly vulnerable to crime. When you have fewer people out on the streets, what we call public guardians, that's an invitation for more street crime. If you have fewer people as the eyes and the ears of the community out and about and interacting with others in the community, what you've done is lower the community's ability to collectively combat crime, which is called collective efficacy.
Now, are you talking about police? When you say guardians, are you talking about police officers or?
The best guardians of the street are not the police officers. They're residents who are looking out for one another. They're people who are outside, doing shopping, interacting, outside in block parties and engaging in other community organized events. They're the eyes and the ears of the police. They're part of what we call an informal social control mechanism. So when crime was low before it started rising precipitously in the 1960s, we had a lot of homogeneous, tightly knit communities with second and third generation people living. People were mostly entertaining themselves in their own neighborhoods. People were out on the street a lot. People knew one another. There were fewer and fewer strangers in the community than there are today. They had a strong informal social control mechanism, and that prevented criminal victimization, especially street crime. When those neighborhoods started to disintegrate, then you have communities that are not so tightly knit. Then you don't know who lives in the community and who doesn't. Street criminals depend on fast ingress and egress out of communities, or they depend on anonymity. That's how criminals feel that they're empowered. Nobody's going to identify who I am because this is a neighborhood where there's mostly people living in apartment buildings, and people come and go, and in the evening there just aren't that many people on the streets. That's an invitation to street crime. So fear of crime keeps people out of the public thoroughfares. Fear of crime makes people less likely to participate in collective and organized activities in neighborhoods. In that respect, fear of crime causes crime. And more crime causes more fear of crime in a vicious cycle.
So now, what can people do to avoid criminal victimization? Is this part of, getting to know your neighbors and that kind of thing that you're talking about?
That's part of it, but also working with the police in community policing kinds of activities in which the police and citizens act in partnership to improve the quality of life in neighborhoods and to identify and solve problems that are related to physical and social disorder. I think you can control crime not just by focusing on crime, but focusing on quality of life issues as they've done in New York City. And so when you clean up the subway and you get rid of all the graffiti on the train, and the train is now comfortable and it looks nice, and and the subway's not dirty and full of garbage, and you've removed from the subway people who have a menacing and disruptive presence, more people are going to use the subway. When more people use the subway, crime against people using the subway goes down. So to affect crime on the subway, what happened in New York City is they first cleaned up the subway, made the subway more attractive to ridership. When ridership went up, more people on the train means less likelihood for victimization. So if I want to pick somebody's pocket on the train, it's easier for me to do it when there are three people sitting in the car. I can pick the pocket and run out. It's going to be harder for me to get out of the train and even to pick somebody's pocket if the train is crowded. There's nowhere to sit, and everybody is, maybe interacting on the train. People are going to be less likely to victimize others when there's more people around. So the New York Miracle involved first kind of public order activities, the restoration of public order, not necessarily a focus on serious crime, a focus on low-level crime. Improvement of the quality of life in public places was where the New York City police began the efforts to reverse the trend of growing victimization in the city.
And indeed, since I am from New York City, I know exactly how different it is from, let's say, back in the 80s to what it is now. And the other thing, of course, talking about just the subways, is they put a lot more undercover police.
Yes.
And that's been, to my mind, that has been really helpful as well.
It's helpful because it's a deterrent.
It
criminals engage in some cost risk risk-benefit analysis. They examine the costs of a potential crime versus the payoff. And so when you have undercover police, they don't know if they're going to be caught that day. The payoff probably won't be so great if you rob somebody or pick somebody's pocket on the subway, but the cost of being arrested is very high relative to the benefit of the reward. And so I think that was the way to do it because would-be offenders don't know whether the car they're on has a police officer. If you put people in uniform, then the would-be pickpocket knows where not to go. But
right.
You don't know who the undercover police officer is. There might not even be an undercover police officer riding the subway that morning, but you don't know that. So it has that kind of a deterrent effect. So, yes, I think that was an effective strategy.
And the other thing that they began to do is they began to take the sort of petty crimes, like jumping the turnstiles, or fiddling around with the tokens and stuff like that. They never used to really take them seriously. Now they were mandated to take them seriously, and they caught a lot of criminals that way.
They did because those people engaged in petty crimes, many of them had outstanding warrants for their arrest. Many of them were in possession of drugs and firearms, and a vast majority of them had criminal histories. So I think the myth that people believe is that petty criminals never engage in serious crimes and vice versa. That's not true. I think most street criminals are opportunists and are not prone to obey rules of any nature, whether they're high-level or low-level rules. And so that strategy had a genuine payoff for the police because they were removing from the streets not only people who were engaged in nuisance crimes, but people who had records of and outstanding warrants for more serious crimes. And by taking the people off the streets who were engaged in the nuisance crimes, you were probably preventing them from committing a more serious crime that day or in the future.
Yeah, amazing. They were so surprised about, I think, to find some of that stuff out. Now, Victims of Crime, it's got chapters on sexual assault, domestic violence, victimization of children and youth, hate crime victimization. I wish we had some time to talk about that. We're coming to the end of the segment. That sounded so important. Psychological consequences of crime, traumatic death of a spouse or a child. This is very important information. Mm-hmm. You can find Dr. Lurigio's book on Amazon.com, and some of the other books that I also was hoping that we would have more time to talk about. You wrote a book on smart sentencing, which is a big interest of mine. And maybe you know what, Dr. Lurigio, maybe we'll have you come back on another show and talk about the smart sentencing. And there's another one that I thought was particularly interesting called Winning the Hearts and Minds of Police Officers. I'd love to talk to you a little more about that.
It would be my pleasure to join you again.
And Dr. Lurigio has written books, Criminal Justice Statistics, Practical Applications for Criminal Justice, The Worlds of the Mentally Ill. This is about deinstitutionalization, which is also fascinating. You've got, there was a Fighting Back, Neighborhood Anti-Drug Strategies, Drugs, Women in the Criminal Justice, and Justice, the roles of criminal justice Women in Criminal Justice series. So it's part of a series. There's lots of interesting books, and maybe we can have you come back again. So that's Dr. Arthur Lurigio, which is Luriguo. We're coming up to our break. Thank you so much for joining me today. And everybody out there, stay tuned. We've got safety tips coming up. How to stay safe while shopping at that mall.
Have you ever thought about having your own internet talk show? Well, if you said yes, then click About Us. Then click Be a Host to get more information. Or just call Jeff Spinard at 480-294-6417.
Say that again?
480-294-6417. voiceamerica.com. After more than 17 years' experience teaching safety skills to thousands of women and men, crime prevention and personal safety expert Susan Bartelstone concluded that by thinking and responding quickly, ideally within 20 seconds, potentially violent criminal encounters can be prevented. Using techniques from many different disciplines and illustrated by 60 real-life examples and success stories, Susan shows how it's done in her new book, Think Fast and Prevent a Violent Crime: How to Respond to Danger in 20 Seconds or Less. Check out www.fightsafe.com for more information. You'll also find information there on Susan's upcoming Crime Prevention 101 personal safety teleseminars. Think fast, talk fast, fight smart, which stress the many opportunities you have to deter or defuse a criminal encounter and how to use your brains instead of your muscles in a fight. Look for the new book information or sign up for Susan Bartelstone's personal safety seminars at www.fightsafe.com today.
News, opinion, your voice counts. Call toll-free 1-866-472-5787. 1-866-472-5787. VoiceAmerica.com.
You're listening to Crime Prevention 101 with Susan Bartelstone. We invite you to share your stories, tips, or suggestions for topics you'd like us to cover, and Susan will address some of these on future shows. Send your story or idea to solutions@fightsafe.com. That email address again is solutions@fightsafe.com. Now back to Crime Prevention 101 with Susan Bartelstone.
And welcome back again. We're in the last segment on Crime Prevention 101, and I just finished talking with Dr. Arthur Lurigio. What an amazing thing to be writing the 20 books. That's just amazing to me. All right, now I promised you some holiday tips, okay? So, listen, you're making out your shopping list this year. Well, why not make out your safety shopping list? And I'm going to give you some tips, and you know what? Check it twice before you go out to that mall. Let's just talk about being safe at the mall. I've got a couple of different areas I'm going to do all throughout December. One of the biggest problems when you go shopping at the mall, you got to worry about pickpockets and purse snatchers. And a crowded mall, holiday time, that's ideal for this kind of crime. And there's a lot of stuff about pickpockets people don't really understand. It's very common that they work in pairs. One person distracts the mark, that's what you're called when they select you, while the other person does the deeds. They are very quick, very good. They can get a wallet out of your pocket or out of your pocketbook before you even have any idea that it happened to you. So first, for men, number one, you never want to carry that wallet in the back pocket, and it isn't always a good idea to carry it inside the jacket pocket. The best place to carry it is in your front pocket, but doing something as simple as securing a comb to your wallet with a rubber band will keep the wallet from being easily slipped out because that front pocket, it's still not foolproof. Sometimes pants have a button or a zipper pocket. That's a good thought for it. But just that rubber band on the wallet is going to keep that. And when they try to get it out, the friction of the rubber band against the wallet is going to alert you that something's going on. There are also devices, because I go on the Internet a lot looking for this stuff. There are Velcro things you can slip over your wallet. Again, it's the idea of the friction so they can't get it out of your pocket quickly. Those are good things. I saw one for about $10. I thought it was a really good idea. And by the way, if you're carrying a lot of cash, which is not a good idea, divide your money into separate stashes, put them in different places. So if worse comes to worse and they do get your wallet, they're not going to get everything from you. Now, for my women listeners, here's a great idea. Designate one special pocketbook as your shopping pocketbook. And this pocketbook should have a zip top and a fold-over flap. and a long strap that goes across your body. Because if you're wearing it across your body, as long as it doesn't scoot around to the back of your body, it's going to leave your hands free to hold on to packages or your unruly child, because we know how good children are in shopping situations. It's going to leave your hands free. It's going to remove the temptation for you to put your pocketbook down, even for a second, is enough for someone to snatch it, because these guys are out there looking for that. They're on the alert for it. And the minute they see it, it's gone. So wearing it across your body is going to remove the temptation to put the pocketbook down. And if it's got a flap over it, it's going to really decrease this pocketbook from being a target, because it's so hard to go under the flap and unzip the pocketbook. So that's your best bet. And if you don't have that kind of a pocketbook, at least keep your wallet. Most pocketbooks have an inner zipper pocket in the top. Keep it in that inner pocket, zipped up. Now, another thing, men and women, don't bring every credit card you own to go shopping. One or two, and a limited amount of cash. You might even want to consider using traveler's checks if you're really going to spend a lot of cash. If worse comes to worse and your traveler's checks get stolen, they can be replaced, even if you lose them. Another tip, dress casually and comfortably. Don't be wearing your expensive jewelry. You don't want to be flashing money. That attracts the eyes of the thieves to you. So casual. Besides, if you're going to be spending a couple of hours at the mall, don't be dressed up in heels. You want to be comfortable. It's also a good idea, if you can, to go with more than one person, because you've got a lot of packages, you bought a lot of stuff, now you want to go try something on. You don't want to leave the packages and the boxes unattended in a shopping bag or a cart. So if you've got more than one person, someone can watch the packages while you go try on what it is you want to try on. And it's also a good idea to consolidate your purchases into one or two large shopping bags, because it's much easier to keep track of them. But don't carry so much that you're going to lose your ability to be aware of what's going on. You always want to be alert and aware, and if you've got your hands full of bundles, it kind of takes away from your concentration, and you don't want to be unable to see, right? That's never going to be a good idea. So I hope I've given you a couple of... Oh, one more. Yes, your expensive purchases. Try and make those the last ones that you do, so you can go straight to your car and carry the really expensive stuff closer to your body than the other stuff. So there's my safety tips for at the mall. We're going to do personal safety tips coming up in the month. I've got safe in the parking lot, keeping your car safe, keeping your home safe when you're away. A couple of tips on that. So make sure you stay tuned. So we're getting ready to end the show now. As I always say, there are no absolutes in a crime scenario, and no advice can address every variable. Each situation has to be evaluated individually and responded to in the way that you instinctively judge the best. And it is my aim, my goal for this radio show to provide you with the information and options that will help you make that instinctive assessment very quickly. For those of you who are survivors of any kind of crime that we've been talking about on the show today, or any kind of crime at all, please understand nothing that happened to you was your fault. Nothing happened that was your fault. Even if you think you used bad judgment in a situation and left yourself vulnerable, that is never an excuse for a crime or for violence. And it's so important to call yourself a survivor and not a victim, and to understand that with the proper professional help, just like we were talking about, you can put what happened into perspective and get on with your life. Please also check back in the archives of this show. I've got 3 great shows on my webpage at voiceamerica.com or on my personal website, safetysolutions.com. I've got 3 shows about non-traditional methods of healing that please listen to those shows. Great information in there. And if you'd like to hear any of the past episodes, they're all there archived on voiceamerica.com. You can also go to crimeprevention101.com or my personal website, dearsafetysolutions.com. Don't forget to check out on dearsafetysolutions.com my safety tips page. You're going to see all the tips from this show and past shows are going to be there. So if you didn't catch all of them today, it's going to be posted right up there on my website. If you've got a question to ask about this show or a comment or a show you'd like to hear, please email me, solutions@fightsafe.com, because I want to help. Got some great stuff coming up. Got more weird police reports. I'm going to read from my mailbag some of the emails you sent me. I'm going to talk about your safety concerns. Got more holiday safety tips. So you know what? It'd be a crime not to listen. So stay tuned and stay safe. Mwah!
We hope you got some useful information and inspiration this week on Crime Prevention 101. Susan Bartelstone invites you to join us again next Saturday at 11 a.m. Pacific Time and 2 p.m. Eastern Time here on Voice America. Have a great weekend and a safe weekend.